Funding for Bea Ojakangas' Welcome to My Kitchen is provided by the citizens of Minnesota through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
A light as air, never-fail recipe for cheese souffle. A bubbly, made from scratch, oven-baked farmer's cheese. And a hearty, dark bread with cheese baked right in the dough. Delicious recipes served up with lessons learned from a lifetime of food travel and writing. I'm Bea Ojakangas, cookbook author, food writer, columnist, wife, mother, and grandmother. I've spent my life learning about food and sharing my knowledge with others. It's given me a certain perspective on cooking, rooted in the flavors, traditions, and rhythms of life in northern Minnesota, and a passion for sharing what I know. Welcome to my kitchen. I grew up on a farm about 4 miles outside of Floodwood. My father, for some reason, I don't know why, and my mom never did know why, he wanted to name me Beatrice. There's no B in the Finnish language, and they don't use a C in the language. They know what it is, but they don't use them. And so he named me Beatrice, and my mother said fine, and Grandpa came over to visit, and that was my mother's dad. And he said in Finnish, mikä hänen nimi on? And she said, Beatrice. Beatrice. That's no human, he said this in Finnish, that's no human name, that's a fruit. And my mom thought, oh, Peachy. So I was Peachy from that point on, and all my relatives still call me Peachy. I'm the oldest of 10. We ate food that we grew. We had a big vegetable garden, and that was important. We froze and canned a lot of food. Grew up on venison. I had heard that 4-H was a good program to be in because you could win trips to the state fair. You could learn a lot, and I was just really eager to learn about everything. The first year, I was going to do a demonstration on dairy foods, and I thought, well, I'll do an egg salad sandwich and an eggnog. There we were in the Floodwood home economics lab, and I was on this table, and I had everything lined up ready to go, and I crack open this egg, and the egg yolk bounced out of the egg, rolled down the counter, dropped on the floor. I didn't win any trips on that one. So the following year I did another demonstration. I thought I will do cheese souffle. So I made a cheese souffle and practiced it, and that fall I won a trip to the state fair. And now I make a cheese souffle without using a recipe. It is one of the simplest things in the world, and it never fails. I like to have a souffle that will fill up the whole dish. So if we have a great big souffle dish, you might want to double the recipe. And I'm going to just spray this thing down with cooking spray. Okay, then we take the foil and make a nice collar out of it, and the souffle then will rise up and be supported by this collar. So that's ready. Now we'll start out with the souffle itself. 4 tablespoons of butter, half a stick, or you can go up or down with that depending, but to me that's about the ideal. And then we're going to add an equal amount, 4 tablespoons or 1/4 cup of flour to that, and we'll just stir it up until it's nice and smooth. So now, after about a minute or so, it's fine. We're going to add milk, and it helps a lot to have the milk warmed up, so I warm the milk up. It's 1.25 cups of milk. Then we're going to add a little pinch of salt and a little pinch of cayenne pepper. Just to give it a little bit of zest, because cayenne goes well with the taste of cheese. So now when this is so thick that you can stir the white sauce, and when you stir it you can see the bottom of the pan. We'll turn the heat off, and we're going to add 2 cups of shredded cheddar cheese, and then we have to separate 6 large eggs. The eggs really need to be at room temperature, so what I often do is just put them into warm water and let them sit in the warm water for a couple of minutes. I've got the egg yolks here, and I'm going to add them to our sauce. Now our sauce has cooled off a little, so it's not going to make scrambled eggs. So we're going to add them 1 or 2 at a time and beat them into our cheese sauce. Now at this point, when you've got the sauce all made, it can sit until it's perfectly cool. You don't have to jump right in and continue with the souffle. Now we need to whip the egg whites. Okay, now we're going to mix a little bit of the egg whites into our sauce, and it's cooled down a little bit. That's okay. One thing kind of nice about a souffle is that once you get the souffle mixture made, you can actually let it sit for up to 2 hours before you bake it. And now you notice it's not completely mixed in, and it doesn't have to be. It can be, you can have little white parts of the egg whites showing, and that's a good thing. So we'll pour the mixture into the souffle dish. You don't have to be real gentle with it either. And my recipe says that you should have a 2-quart souffle dish. Well, we made it a 2-quart souffle dish by putting the collar on. This can go right directly into the oven, and then it'll take about 30 minutes or so, half an hour, for it to be baked. But isn't that pretty? Then we simply cut into it a little bit of grapes, and we've got a lovely souffle. Let's see if we remembered everything. It's good. Well, that was 1952 that I graduated from high school. There were some teachers in Floodwood who were encouraging me to go to college. And they said, you know, University of Minnesota Duluth is a good place to go, and it's not too far away. And I got a $100 scholarship to go to UMD. I went into home economics, enrolled in the home economics program at UMD. I was a freshman. I was staying at the dorm. I worked, you know, in 3 different places on campus, so I was able to pay my dorm. And Dick was working there for the Statesman. He was selling advertising. And that's where I met him. He knew I found out I lived in Floodwood, and he lived in Warba. And he wanted to give me a ride home on the weekends. And I said, no, I'm staying here this weekend. And we went home on opposite weekends. Finally, he changed his weekend. I graduated from UMD on Friday night and got married on Sunday. And I made my own wedding dress. I made it while I was in home management house. Then the following Thursday, Dick came home from England, where he was stationed with the Air Force. And we flew to England. The officer in charge of the base, his wife, said, now girls, if you want to win a bunch of money, you can enter the Pillsbury Bake-Off. And I didn't think too much more about it. But this one time we were coming back from London, we were driving through these little villages from London to Oxford, and Dick says, you have to drive on the left side of the road. He says, Peach, keep me awake, talk about anything, just keep me awake. And so I said, well, okay, what should I enter into the Pillsbury Bake-Off? Do you think I should send a recipe? What recipe should I send? And we started talking about that, and he said, well, why don't you send that recipe for bread that you've been baking, because I was baking a dark bread. So we got home, got back to our apartment, and as soon as I could, I made this bread, and I put a layer of cheese in there, and the cheese all fell to the bottom. I thought I could cut the cheese up into cubes and work it into the dough before I let it rise and bake it. Let's call it cheesy picnic bread. And so I did that, and I mailed the recipe and didn't think anything more of it. And in the meantime, Dick wants to get out of the Air Force early enough so he can enter the university and go for his master's. He had asked the base commander how he could possibly get out early, and he says, well, the only way, there's no way, but the only way would be is if your wife is pregnant. And it turned out I was. So we got an apartment in Duluth. Anyhow, we got this call one day from Pillsbury saying, congratulations, are you Mrs. Richard Ojakangas? Yes. Congratulations, you are one of the 100 finalists in the Pillsbury Bake-Off. I said, oh, really? When is the Bake-Off? It's October 14th. And I said, that is the day the baby is due. I got all this advice from all over the country saying, oh, you have to go, once in a lifetime opportunity. And it turned out that the baby was born on the 1st of October instead of the 14th, which was very fortunate, except that it was really hard to leave the baby. So I went to Los Angeles and won the second grand prize, $5,000. That put Dick through a master's degree at University of Missouri. We cook up some cornmeal with 1 3/4 cups of water and a 1/2 cup of cornmeal. We're going to start this. 1/2 cup of cornmeal goes into it. And we add a little bit of salt, 2 teaspoons of salt to the pot. One, two. Okay, what we do now is basically bring this to a boil and then cook it until it's thickened. And I'm just going to turn this off and add a 1/2 cup of molasses. And into the mixture, you can see how dark it got. You think, oh my goodness, is this going to make a decent bread? But it will. It's really good. Okay, then we add 2 tablespoons of butter. And since this is a fourth of a cup of butter, 2 tablespoons, that's exactly half of it. And we got to let this cool down so that it won't kill the yeast, but I've got to soften the yeast next. And we're going to add a tablespoon of yeast. And a tablespoon is, well, it's just a scant tablespoon. It's a little bit less than, or 1 package of yeast is a little bit less than a tablespoon. But I just go ahead and use the tablespoon. Okay, and we let it sit until it begins to foam. We've gotten this down to 110 degrees, which is like almost perfect. And look at that, we're adding the cornmeal, cooked cornmeal base to the yeast, which has started to bubble. We've got a mixture here, and we're going to start adding flour. And we're going to use about 4 to 4.5 cups of bread flour. Or you could use all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour, you probably end up using a little bit more because all-purpose flour doesn't absorb quite as much liquid as it does the bread flour. Now at this point, if one has a weak wrist, I put it into the electric mixer. You need to mix the bread dough until it feels like wet paint wet paint on a wall. And so we've got it just about at the right point right now. And at this point, then we're just going to let it rise till it's doubled in bulk, and then we'll mix in the cheese. I like to cover it with plastic wrap or with a dry towel, and you can tell when it's risen enough when you can punch nice holes into it. Look at the big bubbles coming out. Wow. Okay, and in shaping these, it's a little bit easier if you just spray the countertop with a little bit of cooking spray. And we turn that out. And because this makes two loaves of bread, we're going to cut the dough into 2 parts, and then we're going to work the cheese into each. I try to do it evenly, but sometimes I don't think I ever get it really even unless I'd weigh out the parts. And this is 1 pound of cheese cut. It's a sharp cheddar cheese, and it's cut into like 1/2-inch chunks. And when I first did this recipe and won the bake-off with it, I used Velveeta cheese, which is very, very soft. I've gotten so I like to use a lot of different kinds of cheese in the chunk of cheese bread. And so I'll try to divide it evenly between these two. And again, I could weigh it out, but you can use your judgment. So we'll just work the cheese in, and you want to be sure you work it in so that it isn't all in one lump in the loaf. So we're going to work it out like so, and I'll do this with the other side too. And then we're going to work in a little bit more cheese once we get that blended in, because we want to be sure that they're evenly dispersed in the dough so that we have a nice looking cut. But if you need too much, then it starts coming out the other side. You don't want to do that either. Then we'll set these on a pan to rise, and it'll take about an hour for them to rise to the right until they're about doubled, and then we'll put them into the oven to bake. Okay, here's our chunk of cheese bread ready to be baked, and it has risen until it's approximately doubled. That's an approximation, you know, you can kind of use your eye for that. And this goes into the oven at 350 for approximately 40 minutes. Oh, it smells so good. Let's take a nice, since this is still warm, I'm going to cut a really thick slice. Oh, that's very nice. Very nice. Look at that. So there we have it. We have chunk of cheese bread. And you know, you almost don't have to put butter on it because it's so good this way. Next we're going to make, well, we call it Finnish squeaky cheese, but in Finland it's called leipäjuusto. In Finland, when they make this, we were there a couple of weeks ago, and people served us the squeaky cheese, but they made it with the first milk from a cow, so that it was very, very rich. But to simulate that, we're going to make a rich milk mixture. And to really enhance the milk, we're going to use 3 cups of powdered milk and a gallon of skim milk. And that goes into the pot. And I'm turning the heat on so that it has a chance to warm up a little bit. And 1 gallon of milk, 3 cups of powdered milk or dry milk, and also here's my quart of cream, because it has to be rich. The cheese that we had in Finland was made from the first milk of a cow, which they called the colostrum milk. But it really is a very rich, thick milk, and it makes a delicious cheese. We really enjoyed it. Then we're going to add some rennet to it. Now, when you have colostrum milk, you don't need to use the rennet because it's already in the cow's milk itself. But we're dissolving the rennet in a little bit of cold water. Okay, once the rennet is dissolved, we're going to stir it into the milk. And the reason I have it over a burner is so that the milk won't be perfectly cold. As the milk is warmed up, the rennet will work a lot better. We're going to put the cover on and just let it sit for the few minutes that it takes for the rennet to set the milk. Ideally, I let it sit for an hour or two because it works into my schedule. I can run off and do some laundry or grocery shopping or something, and then come back and complete the process. But I'll just let it sit here now. We let this sit for about 20 minutes until it begins to look like this. And you can cut right through the milk, almost like as if you're cutting through custard. And you can see the whey is beginning to separate. Isn't that fun? And what I like to do is cut it into chunks. Into squares. And you can see that the whey is separating. Now what we're going to do is dampen a piece of cheesecloth. And cheesecloth you can buy at a regular fabric store. And then all we have to do is be really brave and pour it out. And it will catch the juices in a pan underneath. We may have more juice than that pan can hold, but we'll deal with that as it happens. This is just the way that all cheese starts out. They will make a bag out of this and let it drain. So we let it drain until you can't see any more of the whey just sort of sitting there. And I'm cutting through it again to make room for the whey to come out. Ideally, I'll let it sit in the refrigerator overnight, and it turns out a much heavier, thicker, more compact cheese. This is the curds that have been draining overnight, and there's still whey in there that needs to come out. But what I'm going to do is turn it out onto this board or onto this pan, and then we're going to put it under broiler and broil this, and we can just press it down. It doesn't matter if it breaks up like that, because we're going to put it into the oven and bake, and that's why it's called bread cheese, lepe juusto, because it has been baked. We're baking the cheese until it gets a nice brown spots on top, and you need to press down the cheese so that it kind of extrudes. We'll take it out and take a look and see if it's okay yet. Now you see it's still a little bit jelly-like, but we're going to drain off the whey that has accumulated. You see? And oh, it smells so good. And this is the way they do it in Finland too. And there are some kinds of cheese that are broiled right on a plank, that they leave it at an angle so that it will drain out. But this is the easiest way for us to do it. And I think we'll broil this a little bit longer, but it gets so that the finished product will be about like this, the way it is on the edge here. That is so good. I'm gonna put this back in the oven though. Typically we would serve this cut up into pieces, or sometimes into small pieces. Sometimes people put a chunk of this cheese into their coffee, or we might serve it on a piece of bread, or you might serve it just plain by itself with some fruit. It's pretty versatile. Next time we'll be celebrating Finland with savory piiraka, fragrant pulla, and a mouth-watering Karelian paiste. There's always something delicious cooking in my kitchen. I'm Bea Ojakangas. See you next time.
Funding for Bea Ojakangas' Welcome to My Kitchen is provided by the citizens of Minnesota through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.